You're 65 years old, and you finally sit down with a retirement calculator. Maybe just the first time you've been honest with it. You type in your savings, your age, your target, and the screen spits back a number that drops your stomach through the floor. $3,500 a month. That's what you'd need to stash away every single month for the next 5 years. Just to scrape together the bare minimum to stop working at 70. Not comfortably, not freely, just barely. And you sit there trying to figure out how you got here. Because you did what you were supposed to do. You worked, you earned, you spent reasonably. You told yourself you'd get serious about it later. Well, later just showed up, and it brought a bill you cannot pay. Except nobody pauses to ask what that freedom actually looks like. When you run the real numbers. Say you need $40,000 a year to live. 25 times that is your target. And if you're retiring at 70 with spending trimmed to the bone, that target is $250,000. And $250,000 at 70 doesn't buy you freedom. It buys you a quiet room in a cheap zip code, a grocery list you track to the cent, and maybe 1 or 2 local trips a year timed to off-peak pricing. Healthcare gets handled by whatever state program applies to you. But anything beyond a routine checkup comes straight out of a budget with zero slack. Every dollar has a job before it even lands in your account. Now here's where the lie really cuts. If you had started setting money aside at 25, what would it cost to reach $250,000 by 70? Just $66 a month. One dinner out, a meal you wouldn't even remember the following week. Quietly compounding in the background for decades while you went about your life. But you didn't do that, and most people don't. At 25, retirement feels like a country you'll never visit. So you skip the $66. And then one morning you're 65, staring at a screen demanding $3,500 a month. And the distance between those two numbers is the exact price of every year you believed there was still time. That gap from 66 to 3,500 isn't just math. It's a penalty. It's the receipt for a belief system that told you planning could wait, that your income would grow fast enough to fix it, that the future would handle itself. And you know the worst part? The formula everyone keeps quoting, the 4% rule. The multiply by 25 shortcut, none of it flagged this cliff for you. It handed you a clean target and never mentioned that the target moves. That inflation chews through your timeline. That the market doesn't owe you a single percentage point of return. So before we go any deeper, you need to let go of the retirement story you've been carrying around. Because that story was built on a lie. And everything that comes next only works if you see it for what it is. So let's talk about what the math actually says. Because this is where most people go quiet. Imagine you're 45, and you've been telling yourself for 20 years that you'll get serious about retirement eventually. You type in your goal, $500,000 by age 60, at a realistic 7% annual return. You must save $1,577 every single month. That's not rent, that's not groceries, that's not your car payment. That's on top of everything else in your life. Just stare at that for a second. If you'd started that same journey at 25, the number drops to $278 a month. Same goal, same $500,000. But the market did most of the carrying for you because you gave it 35 years of runway instead of 15. The difference between starting at 25 and starting at 45 is over $1,300 a month in pressure on your future self. That's the cost of waiting, not in some abstract motivational poster way, in actual dollars leaving your checking account every 30 days. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Some people hear about the FIRE movement, and they latch onto the 10% return figure because it sounds better. At 10%, starting at 25, you only need $132 a month. That's a phone bill, it feels doable. But 10% is the optimistic number. It's the number before inflation chews through your purchasing power. The 7% figure adjusts for that. It's less exciting, sure, but it's the one that won't lie to you. At 62, when you're checking your account balance, and wondering why it doesn't stretch the way you planned. So let's say you do hit that 500,000. What does life actually look like? You're 60, you pull 4% a year, that's $20,000. Social Security or a government pension might kick in around 62 or 65, depending on where you live, and that fills part of the gap. You can afford a decent place in a mid-cost area. You run a small car, you eat well at home, and maybe go out once in a while. One trip a year, nothing extravagant, just enough to feel like you're still living. Healthcare is the wild card if you're in a country with public coverage. If you're not, a chunk of that money is already spoken for before you spend a dime on yourself. This isn't a life of luxury, it's a life where you're not panicking. That's the honest ceiling of $500,000. Start at 35 instead of 25, and your monthly contribution at 7% jumps to $617. You lost 10 years, and the market punished you by more than doubling your burden. Start at 45, and it nearly triples again. The curve doesn't bend gently, it snaps. Every decade you wait, the math gets meaner. And there's no trick, no hack, no shortcut that reverses compounding time you already lost. And if 500,000 only buys you a careful, measured existence at 60, what does it take to walk away from work at 50? The target jumps to 750,000. Picture someone sitting at their kitchen table at 50 years old, calculator open, staring at a number that makes their chest tight. $4,333 a month, just to reach $750,000 by 60. Over $50,000 a year, funneled straight into investments, while still paying rent, still buying groceries, still keeping the lights on. For most people pulling in a normal salary, that number isn't a goal, it's a wall. Somebody else, 25 years old, same target, same $750,000. Their monthly number is $416, not easy, but survivable. The gap between those two people isn't talent, it isn't discipline, and it isn't even income. It's time, and more specifically, it's what you were allowed to do with your time before anyone explained the rules of this game. That's the sorting mechanism, not effort, but access. Both paths lead to the exact same destination, but one was always designed for people who already had a head start. The other was designed to make you feel like your failure is your own fault. The system hands you a number and says hit this and you're free. But it never mentions that the people who reach these numbers early had an advantage. They owned something before they even started saving. Property, equity, a business, or an inheritance. Something that generated value while they slept. The rest of us are converting hours into dollars, and then trying to convert those dollars into decades of survival. That math was never built in our favor. Think about your own number, and think about when you started, and ask yourself honestly, were you late because you were careless, or were you late because nobody handed you the map until the race was already halfway done? So what actually moves the needle? It's this. You open your bank app, right now, today, and you set up an automatic transfer that fires when your paycheck lands. Before you see the money, before you feel the money, before your brain starts negotiating with you about what you deserve this month, the cash moves into a total market index fund, and you never touch it. That's the entire method, no vision board required. No budgeting spreadsheet with 40 color-coded tabs. One automated instruction that runs whether you're motivated, hungover, or bored, or convinced the market is about to crash. At 25, the number you need to move is $1,680 a month. That's roughly $20,000 a year, not comfortable but survivable if your rent is modest and your car is paid off. The person who automates that transfer at 25 and never cancels it is building a runway to walk away from work by 45, with $1 million compounding behind them. The person who says they'll start next quarter, or after the next raise, or once things settle down, wakes up at 35 needing $5,500 a month. And if they keep waiting until 40, the math stops being a plan. It just starts being a punishment. The only thing separating the person who retires at 45 from the person who's still grinding at 65 is whether they made one deposit automatic and refused to touch the setting. You don't need discipline every single morning. You need discipline once, on the day you set it up. And then you need the stubbornness to leave it alone. When your friend buys a new car, or your coworker books a first-class trip, when every ad on your phone is telling you that you earned a little treat, think about what $45,000 to $50,000 a year in passive withdrawals actually looks like. It's a paid-off home in a reasonable zip code. It's groceries without scanning the clearance aisle. It's 1 or 2 real trips a year, not luxury, but not staycations either. It's waking up on a Tuesday with nowhere to be and absolutely no one to report to. That life doesn't require genius. It requires one automated transfer and the willingness to live like you're already free, instead of performing like you're almost rich. And here's the part that trips people up. The lifestyle that gets you to that number is the same lifestyle that keeps you alive after you hit it. If you can't live on less than you earn right now, $1 million won't save you, it will just delay the panic. The transfer isn't the hard part, keeping your spending flat while your income grows. That's where most people quietly lose the race. Picture a random Tuesday morning, no alarm, no commute. You open your eyes because your body decided to, not because some calendar notification dragged you out of sleep. You check your account, not out of panic, but out of habit. The number sitting there isn't flashy, and it isn't Instagram money. But it's enough that no boss, no landlord, or emergency room bill can force you back into a chair you hate. That's what this entire conversation has been building toward. Not wealth, but a buffer. A gap between you and desperation wide enough that you get to breathe. And here's the part nobody wants to hear. This works best when you start early, when you're young enough that compound interest has room to do the heavy lifting. But if you're sitting here at 40 or 50, thinking you missed the window, I need you to understand something. The window doesn't slam shut, it just gets narrower. Your number changes, and your timeline shifts. Maybe full retirement at 45 is off the table, and that's okay. But semi-retirement at 55? A life where you work 3 days a week doing something you actually chose? That's still sitting right there on the spreadsheet waiting for you. Because the real shift isn't in your portfolio, it's in your head. The moment you stop seeing yourself as someone who is stuck, and start seeing yourself as someone who is building, even slowly, even late, you start making entirely different decisions. You stop inflating your lifestyle every time your income ticks up. You stop treating every raise like permission to spend more. And that quiet discipline, compounded over years, doesn't just grow your savings. It completely rewrites who you are. So here's what I want you to do right now. Drop your age and the year you want to stop working in the comments. Not a vague goal, but an actual number. Let's see who's running real math and who's still just dreaming about it.